what Diane raised is so important, because not only is it, like she said, the bank's role in the foreclosure epidemic and the eviction crisis, but they got their dirty, rich hands in everything. And, you know, it just really shows you how much, you know, capitalism is in control of everything, and how diametrically opposite it is to what the people really need. You know, it's a crime against this school children in Detroit there. It's 90 cents on every dollar is going right to the banks. It's just, it's criminal.
That's right.
But, you know, I think when we should consider how the moratorium is going to participate in this August 28th march that Diane mentioned, that the UAW and Jesse Jackson and other religious and community and union leaders have called. And, you know, one of the things which we could really do that would make a really big contribution to understanding the struggle would be to focus on the role of the banks and all the different problems. Just, you know, the fact that the unions are starting to target banks, and, you know, it plays into how much the banks have gotten bailed out and the anger at the banks. But is there really an understanding of how much the banks, you know, the banks get paid first for everything, and this is like the #1 reality of everyday life, and people still don't even know about it. So anything we can do, you know, Diane writing these fabulous articles, every single thing we can do to keep pushing out there that these banks, these capitalist banks and predators are killing us. The better.
As an addendum, it would be helpful if people would write letters to the editor and the Citizen about those articles, because sometimes we have a little vacillation on the political standpoint on the papers. So the more that they hear, the more. Yeah, you can do it online actually if you want to do it online. And they sometimes publish them from offline. So.
Dan, I don't think everybody may have heard that.
Right. It would be good for people to write letters to the editor. When you see the articles in the Citizen, you can either do it online or write a written letter to the editor, particularly commenting on the role of the banks, the articles on the role of the banks, because there's been a little bit of a political back and forth there in terms of sometimes the editors wanting to be more conservative. I think it was a little bit demonstrated by the fact that the current article was kind of focused a little bit more on the state than on the banks, because I said the banks control the Detroit public schools, but it wasn't major because they did get most of the article in there, and I've had to fight for that perspective. So it'd be helpful if people would write letters to the editor.
Okay. Jerry?
Just a couple comments on it too. I mean, it really shows how diabolical things are. These are the same banks. 85% of mortgage loans in Detroit are subprime loans. That means they're loans that begin at 9% or higher. And so, you know, I mean, they're essentially usury, and that's really what bankrupted the housing market in Detroit. When the housing market collapsed, people should be aware that with every foreclosure, the banks get bailed out. That almost all of your loans now are either backed up by the government, either by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or HUD. If you go to 36th District Court, then most of the evictions of foreclosed homes are being carried out by the government, by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. What that means is, say you have a mortgage for $100,000 on a home, when you go into foreclosure, Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, which is the government, it's been taken over, they pay the bank the full amount of that mortgage plus the fees. Then they put it on the market, sell it for about $5,000 in Detroit, and the $95,000 difference is paid out of our tax dollars. The bailout to the banks goes on with every foreclosure. And there was a recent article that this now is amounting to $400 billion. That's how much money the government has doled out to these government-backed agencies to pay the banks. And so we're bailing out the banks every day. The city's broke because of it. And so where does the city treasury cut back on? Not the banks, but on the workers. And because of that, you don't even have enough workers. They can't even spend the stimulus money that comes into Detroit. Part of it, in the CAFR they put out, which is the City of Financial Analysis, they said there was $235 million appropriated for weatherization funds. As of at least the time of the CAFR, the city had only spent $1 million of it. Why? Because there's nobody working to administer those funds to get them in the hands of the people. The other thing is the banks have direct control now over the budget. It doesn't really matter who's in office because it doesn't go through them. Revenue, the casino money doesn't even go into the general fund. It goes into a trustee to make sure the banks gets that money. The state revenue sharing doesn't go into the general fund. It goes to a trustee to make sure the banks get their money. And I think that's the same with the school aid too. All this $438 million, it doesn't go even to school. The school board don't even get to see it. It goes to a trustee to make sure the banks get their money. The banks are directly running. They've directly usurped control over city government at all levels. Very much what happens with the IMF all over the third world, and which led to countries like Venezuela and Ecuador and Bolivia having revolutions to overturn it. And very much of what's happening in Greece, where the workers are going out in a general strike to fight it. But the problem here is people aren't educated to it. And we have been raising it. We've had leaflets out for the last few months and passed them out to explain it. It's so high. I think it's hard. It's so grotesque. It's hard for people to get it. And we need to propagate it. And because if people don't see it, you're fighting with a hand behind your back, you know? I mean, sure, we're against, Bob shouldn't be running the schools. We all can't stand Bing. But the point is, unless you get to the real power, who's really controlling, who's running the strings, you ain't going to get to the power. It's not going to change. And the power is in the banks who are behind the system. It's like what's going on with the mortgage stuff. You know, whatever Obama's intentions, Geithner and them are the direct representatives of the banks, of Citibank, in administration, and they're making sure that every program that comes up the funds go all to the banks. Every program that comes up to deal with foreclosures is a subsidy to the banks. And who makes those decisions? Geithner, Lawrence Sumner's. Who did Lawrence Sumner's work for? Rich Rubin. Who did Rubin work for? Citibank. Got a $136 million parachute to retire. That's who's running things. Yeah. And that's what we have to educate. And I agree with what people have already said. I think the fact of this march coming up, and we'll talk about it more, opens up the potential to raise these issues on a broader arena in the context of the struggle, and that we can use this summer to educate people to this, so that by the fall, our problem is when we've gone to the city, we've gone with a small number of people and we haven't gotten a hearing. But we need to go with hundreds and thousands of people, at least hundreds of people, to put the focus on where it belongs, to raise these demands. And I think that we should see this summer as part of the issues that we raise, of course, to raise the moratorium on debt service. That the people need jobs, the workers have a right to their jobs, the city workers don't need wage cuts, we need more services, and the people that need to be cut. You know, in the city budget, there's one area that's unrestricted funds. Unrestricted funds are money appropriated for human services and for the wages of the workers. They call those funds unrestricted. In the budget, in the CAFR, they call restricted funds the money that goes to the banks. In other words, you ain't supposed to touch that money. Well, we need to reverse it. The unrestricted funds need to be the funds that go to the banks, and they should be the last to get paid while the people get paid to do it, and there should be a moratorium on debt. Yeah.